Welcome to the Wine Podcast for JaneAnson.com. I'm your host, Suzanne Desbois. And in this series on collecting, we are bringing you the people who make extraordinary wines, rare wines, and memorable wines. Today, we're speaking with Charles Philipponnat, who makes champagne that every gastronome, every collector should have in their cellar. They all have a story that I find very interesting. They all have an identity, and we are delighted to have Charles with us today. So thank you for joining us. So we're going to dive right into your prize plot, the Clos de Goisses. What makes this vineyard so special, and what's its history? Can you talk to us about that?
Well, the history is a very long one. It's one of these places in Champagne where vines have always been since at least the 15th century. It's a very steep slope facing south, which makes it probably the hottest vineyard in Champagne. So if you need to know what's going to happen with global warming, well, we've already got it here. And it's not so bad. It's actually riper, where and at the same time it does remain mineral and salty because the subsoil is chalk. So the
And I think,
combination of these two, sorry,
sorry, yeah, I think I read, isn't it that the topsoil is really quite shallow, right? And so the roots are going directly into the chalk. Is that true?
well, there's several elements that constitute the terroir: the slope, the exposure. The slope causes erosion to make the soil very shallow. You're right. Um, and again, it's a very warm vineyard because it's fully south-facing, very steep and south-facing.
And also, the name is some hint about its character, right? Because a clos, it's walled. It's a walled vineyard, and then
It's
the
a walled
Goisses, isn't it?
vineyard.
Means steep.
Actually, we don't know what Goisses used to mean in the
Oh,
local
okay.
dialect, but what we know is that there are several places called Goisses, La Goisse, Les Goisses. It's the same word every time, and they all relate to a steep vineyard. So what it really means is a steep vineyard.
And this vineyard, when your uncle bought it, I believe it was your uncle who bought it in the 30s, wasn't it semi-abandoned? It was too difficult to farm.
It was mostly because of the phylloxera crisis,
Okay.
whereby the vineyard had been half abandoned during the war. It was a time of deep crisis in the whole world and in Champagne as well, which is why people concentrated on the easier vineyards. Um, the people who owned Clos des Goisses before went bankrupt around World War One, and that's how my uncle ended up buying it.
And when did your family then decide to make a single vineyard champagne from these plots?
Immediately. My great uncle bought it in 1935, and the first vintage under the Philipponnat rule is 1935 indeed. So he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew he was buying it to make a single vineyard from it.
And was that unique at that time? I mean, was that a forward-thinking decision, or was this something that a talented vigneron should know?
Not at that time, because the Maison de Champagne used to blend and used to explain that the quality was from blending, that single vineyards could not reach the same level of association of qualities from different vineyards to make something superior. So the idea of a single vineyard champagne was something a bit of an iconoclast kind of thinking. And I still have letters here in Mareuil-sur-Aille at our offices from colleagues of my great uncle that asked him to stop with it because they thought it was a danger
Because
for
it was a
other
crazy
champagne
idea.
houses, and it was killing the whole philosophy of blending in champagne.
That's great. And talk to me about the grape varieties. It was started off, I think, was it mostly Chardonnay when you first purchased it?
It was mostly Chardonnay until the early 60s. And in the early 60s, when we renewed the vineyard because it was getting old, We decided to keep some Chardonnay, but mostly replant Pinot Noir. The general balance in Clos des Goisses, in both the vineyard and the cuvées, when we blend the two varieties, is 60% Pinot Noir and 40% Chardonnay. So there still is some Chardonnay in Clos des Goisses.
Okay. And now you make more than one cuvée from this plot of less than 6 hectares, right? So can you just explain to us, well, for why, first of all, and how are they different and what are the similarities?
Well, of course, there's a lot of similarities because they come from the same place. Um, Clos des Goisses Rosé is very simply the equivalent of the Clos des Goisses White with a little more Pinot Noir and Rosé de Saignée, free-run juice from Clos des Goisses, obviously, from Pinot Noir, grown in Clos des Goisses, which makes it fruitier and more intense. It also makes it even fresher, paradoxically, because the tannins in the rosé are antioxidative and they make the wine even cleaner, even more exciting, even more precise.
And how many bottles of the rosé do you produce?
Very little because we need to keep some of the grapes to make the white base, and therefore the production of Clos des Goisses Rosé is never more than 3,500 bottles.
Okay. Okay. And Les Cintres, I think that's how it's pronounced.
Les cintres is an architectural term that relates to the arches in the walls inside the vineyard.
Okay. And that's an old plot in the center.
Les cintres is made from two old plots in the very middle, in the most extreme part of Clos des Goisses. Um, one of the plots is called Les Grands Cintres, the large cintres, the large arches, and the second one is called Les Petits Cintres. So the two plots, one is a little more than a quarter of an acre, and the other one is about an acre large. So that's very small, and we never take it all to make the Les Cintres bottling because we want Les Cintres to also be available to enrich the proper usual Clos des Goisses cuvée. So when we make it, and we don't make it every year, when we make it, we use only a third of the grapes. So that's only 2,000 to 3,000 bottles.
Okay. And when do you decide that you're going to make it?
Um, at the time of assessing the vin clair, assessing the new wines in the spring following the harvest, and deciding whether we blend such or such elements with such or such other element to create such or such a cuvée, or directly blend single parcel cuvées, or decide not to. For instance, last year we decided not to.
Okay. I think I'd read somewhere that the vines are a massive selection of old vines.
In some of the parcels are the result of older massal selections. Since I've arrived at Philipponnat, we've planted only Burgundian material, a few clones, Pinot Fin from Burgundy, and also some massal selections from Burgundy. The idea is to look for intensity of flavor by specializing on selections or clones that have more intensity and that are primarily intended for red wines.
If someone is deciding between maybe they're going to buy either for their collection Clos de Goisses or the Cintre, what's the difference in the taste profile?
Les Cintres is Pinot Noir only because it's only these two little parcels from the center of Clos des Goisses that are both called Les Cintres. And it's more intense also because being the central parcel, it's the steepest. It's the place where the soil is the shallowest and we are closer to the bedrock, to the chalk underneath. And because of the exposure, it also gets even warmer than the rest of Clos des Goisses. So it's an extreme example of what Clos des Goisses can be. That's how I'd describe it. Concentrate. It's a concentrate of
Okay,
Clos de Gauche.
concentrated. What are the food pairings you suggest? What would you serve them with, and what vintages are ready to drink now?
I
What's your favorite thing to have with Les Centres?
with Les Cintres. Well, there's one that we all loved, which is 2010. 2010 was a surprise. We didn't think 2010 was going to be the beauty it ended up being after we started tasting it and putting it on the market years ago. I'd say that right now, 2010 is one of the most superior vintages from Clos de Gauisse we've ever had, even though it didn't look that way at the time of the harvest. But of course, we also made 2012, which by all accounts is considered the best vintage in the recent years. 2009 was also lovely. 2008 obviously was beautiful, but more mineral. And I'm not sure this very mineral acid character um, is true to Clos de Gauisse. I think Clos de Gauisse is more interesting and better in the warmer years when it really expresses its power.
If you were going to open up a vintage Clos de Gauisse now, which one would it be?
Well, if I could drink 1979 every day, I would. But it's not there anymore.
Okay. And what would
Um,
you serve it with? What do you suggest serving your champagnes with? The Clos de Gauisse or the Les Centres
well,
2010?
with younger, with something serious. You can go as far as meat, not red meat, obviously, but meat stews would be wonderful. Um, with the rosé, you can go as far as lamb, even
You
pink.
could have lamb. That's an
If,
unusual pairing. I don't
yes, you
think
can
I
have
had
lamb
thought of that.
with the rosé, because there's a bit of red. There's a bit of red
Okay.
character in the rosé, and that does the connection with lamb, especially since these wines have a lot of power. You have to remember that they come from the hottest vineyard in Champagne. Um,
Okay. So
and
now
if
you
you
also
forget
make,
about the bubbles and close your eyes, they taste like red, really.
okay. Okay, wonderful. And you also make the Clos de Gauisse Élevé, the long vieillissement. And
Yes.
I looked on your boutique online, and you have the 94, the 97, and 98 currently on
Yeah.
for sale.
We've already released 99 as well, and
Okay.
we are about to release 2000. The idea is to do a second release of Clos de Gauisse after 25 years from the date of harvest to the date of presence in the market. So we're getting ready for 2000.
And so what would you serve with one of these LV, long vieillissement Clos de Gauisse? What would be the perfect
I
dish to
think you can
serve?
go as far as cheese, especially the soft cheeses we have here in France, the tasty ones, cheeses like Époisse or Maroilles or Langres, uh, the washed crust cheeses from raw milk, obviously.
I think that's really interesting because you've talked about lamb, you've talked about white meats and cheeses, and those aren't things that a lot of people think of pairing with champagne. And I think, a little later in our discussion, we're going to talk about the ultimate champagne dinner. But I think that this is really interesting to give people ideas on how to serve these wines.
Clos de Gauisse, well, good champagnes in general, and Clos de Gauisse especially, um, pair very well uh, with food. I mean, they are meant to go with food. Every time we create a blend, every year we make a new blend, every year we decide a bottling. We're thinking about how we will pair it. We're thinking about the possibility of pairing these wines. And our objective at Philipponnat, since we work a lot with Pinot Noir variety, is to go for power and flavor and taste and depth, which makes these wines very friendly with foods, even tasty, even rich foods, even foods you usually associate with red wine. Putting apart red meat, red beef is not something I would recommend. But anything stewed and the other meats, especially white meats, will go very well with champagne.
Okay. I want to ask you a little bit about your other vintage champagnes. You've got the Blanc de Blanc, a Grand Blanc, a Blanc de Noir. Can you just explain the differences between the three?
Blanc de Blanc and Grand Blanc are the same. Our Blanc de Blanc used to be called Grand Blanc, but we've decided to be clear and true to what's inside the bottle. So we now call it Blanc de Blanc, very simply.
So it's
These
100%
wines,
Chardonnay, correct?
that's 100% Chardonnay, and the Blanc de Noir is 100% Pinot Noir. In the
Okay.
past, we used to have a blend of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but we finally decided that it was more interesting to have a pure Chardonnay and a pure Pinot Noir side by side. Um, to make things very clear, we like to have a clear definition of each cuvée, of each wine. They're made in the same style, but they each have their personality, their own personality.
Okay.
They are both made from Premier Cru and Grand Cru only. They are both made from the first pressing only, but that's true of all of our cuvées, including the non-vintage cuvées. They are aged for about the same times. Our rule is to release the wines after 6 years, which we consider a proper age for vintage wines. They're still tasting fresh, they're still tasting mineral and salty, but they've already developed autolysis, which is the third dimension of champagne, in my opinion. Autolysis is the yeast character after it ages with the wine. I'd like to say a special word about Blanc de Noir. Blanc de Noir is what is sometimes called by chefs our signature, not dish, but our signature cuvée, because we are Pinot Noir specialists and because we wanted to demonstrate that Pinot Noir can be fresh and crisp. It doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to show some early traces of oxidation. And I think we've pretty much achieved our objective with Blanc de Noir. It's a lovely Blanc de Noir. It's both very fruity and very sharp. That's the Philipponnat style. Fruity, intense in terms of fruit, and sharp, and clean, and mineral, which is a bit paradoxical. In Champagne, you find mostly elegant champagnes, so that's the Blanc de Blanc type, or you find instances of champagnes that use more Pinot Noir, but almost always in a slightly oxidative way. Um, we've chosen an original path because we want our champagnes to be light and crisp and tasty at the same time. It's not a contradiction. Uh, both sides complement each other. They sort of bend together and create a higher architecture.
And what's your philosophy on dosage? Because I believe that when you arrived in 2000, you reduced it across the board, right?
Yes, at the time, Philipponnat was using the classical dosage of the time, which was 13 grams for non-vintages and between 11 and 13 grams for vintage wines. As soon as I arrived, we dropped the dosage on our non-vintage Royal Reserve down to 8 grams, which is a low brut dosage. It's still a perceptible dosage, but it's low. And we decided to drop the dosage on the vintage wines, all the vintage cuvées, including Clos de Goisses, down to the extra brut level at 4.25 grams. And we've stuck with it. And it never changes. We never adjust the dosage. We think that if there's a difference in perception regarding the acidity of the wine, because that's mostly what the dosage is meant to compensate, and then if there's a difference, it's nature given. It's something that is from the grapes, and we should not change that. We shouldn't adjust that. It's interesting to discover what the characters of a vintage are year after year, and from one vintage to another, there are differences. We don't want the cuvées to be identical. We only want them to be in the same style. We want them true to the style, but not identical. And changing the dosage would already be, in my opinion, industrial thinking. So we don't do it. Um, so you can compare one vintage with another, and you can compare one cuvée with another and find differences. Well, they're natural differences, and we should leave them to exist.
And what about your 1522 cuvée? That's supposed to mark the arrival of a certain distant ancestor in the
That's
region,
right.
correct?
That's right. He was called Avril, April, like the month of April, and he was a Swiss captain that went into the service of France, as it was called at the time, after Switzerland went to peace with the warring parties in the Italian wars around the beginning of the 16th century. And we know that in 1522, that ancestor was already owning a vineyard in Haï, in a place called Le Léon, that we still own to this day. That's why we decided to call this cuvée, which is a cuvée of only Grand Cru wines, only Grand Cru grapes, 1522. The Haï from that parcel is the core of 1522, and we associate it with two other Grand Cru, one from the north side of the Montagne de Reims, usually Mailly, and another Grand Cru of Chardonnay from the Côte des Blancs, which creates the ideal Grand Cru Champagne kind of construction with around one third of the south side of the Montagne de Reims, namely Haï, one third of the north of the Montagne de Reims, namely Mailly, and one third from the Côte des Blancs, usually Auger or Ménil-sur-Auger.
Okay. You're the 16th generation, is that right?
Well, it depends how you count it, because there have been many intermarriages between families. So it can be
Okay.
15, 16, or 17, depending which way you go.
But it's been a long time anyway.
It's been a long time. It's around 16 generations, yes. I'm a direct descendant of April Le Philipponnat.
I know, you have the last name.
Same
See,
last name, yes.
yeah. Well, okay, my last question for you. I adore all champagne dinners. And I would love it if you could recommend to us the ideal four-course meal and pair it with four of your favorite cuvées and vintages. No expense spared. This is the ultimate
Oh, well.
Philipponnat dinner.
Well, there are many things. There are many things you can do, and you can go into large expenses or not. Um, I would start with something very sharp, like our non-dosé, our non-vintage non-dosé, because it's younger and it has no dosage. That's one of, while talking about dosage, we decided to have two dosage with our non-vintage. One is the usual dosage of 8 grams, and the other one is no dosage at all. That's very
Okay.
good with seafood, especially raw seafood. So if you like sushi, or rather sashimi,
So we could start with that with sashimi. Is that that's what we're
yes,
starting our meal with?
you could do that. And if you want to
Okay.
go into a large expense, you can add a little caviar on it.
Okay, excellent. I love caviar too.
Yeah, that would
I
work.
guess we're starting really well for this meal. Okay.
Then,
What's the next course?
then for the next course should be fish,
Okay.
and it could be the blanc de blanc. It could be the
Ah,
blanc de blanc because it at Philipponnat, the blanc de blanc is also very ripe and is somewhat rich. It's beautifully paired with fish, especially the more iodic kind of fish like turbot.
and could it handle a creamy sauce, a buttery
No, or
sauce, or no?
rather a butter sauce,
A butter sauce.
rather a kind
Okay.
of a beurre blanc that you could make using the same cuvée of champagne. You can make.
And what vintage would you serve? What is the perfect vintage right now?
I would serve a relatively young vintage. So why not the current vintage, 2018?
Okay.
But of course, you could also taste and enjoy another vintage. But I wouldn't go for a very very old Grand Blanc. I would keep that for hard cheeses like a Comté
Okay.
or
So for the next
Yeah.
course, for cheese courses, we would have hard cheeses. Would we have blue cheese?
Um,
No.
I don't like blue cheeses so much with champagne. Hard cheeses work well with older Chardonnay, but what I would recommend, I'll talk about cheese later because first we have a
Okay.
meat course,
Oh, that's
and
right. This is a real feast.
it's a feast.
This is
It's
this
feast.
is
It's
the
four
real
cuvées.
thing.
When you ask me
Okay,
to
the meat
choose
course.
four
What's our
cuvées,
meat course?
so the meat course could be feathered game, or if you want something
Ooh,
lighter, a guinea fowl, and that could handle the cream sauce.
okay.
Ideally
Sorry,
with
what was the vintage
mushrooms.
what was the vintage we're having?
You could either choose something young and fruity, that would be the current vintage, 2019, or go for something a little bit older, a little bit deeper, especially if you're using game, and that could be 2012, which is a
Okay.
beautiful,
Okay.
beautiful and very rich yet balanced vintage. So it could go well with the cream sauce and some mushrooms, black mushrooms. So it could be truffles, it could be trumpets, it could be morels. That would work very well.
Well, I think the Clos de Goisses, wouldn't that go lovely though with truffles? I
It,
think
w-
that
it
that
would
might
also it would also go well
you
with
do
truffles.
really well with truffles.
Yes, but I think Blanc de Noir was interesting to pair in a four-course menu, and I've decided that I'd put the Clos des Goisses at the end with cheese, which is why I'm putting Blanc de Noir with the game or the guinea fowl.
Okay. So the Clos de Goisses we keep for the cheese.
Yes. So it should be like I said a little bit earlier. It should be raw milk, and it should be a washed crust, tasty cheeses, tasty French cheeses. Uh, This is typically like Maroilles, which, in my opinion, is the best match in terms of cheeses with champagne, with older champagnes, and with Clos de Goisses, with richer champagnes. Or it could be Époisse, the typical Burgundy cheese. Or it could be Langres, which is in the Haute-Marne district, right in between Burgundy and Champagne.
Okay, so that's a beautiful cheese platter we have.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're all similar, but I'm recommending them because I think they work very well with champagne, really. And people tend to forget that champagne can go as far as tasty cheeses, but it works extremely well.
Oh, we have an interesting question from from the gallery here. Do we decant vintage champagne or not? Do we decant your would we decant a Clos de Goisses or Lysantra?
My opinion about decanting is that you should decant only if the wine is reduced, only if it's reductive. So it rather applies to the younger vintages of wines, of champagnes that have been aged a long time in the cellar when we release them. So if you're buying Clos des Goisses 2014 or 15 now, uh, bottles that have been disgorged only 1 or 2 years ago, it's a good idea to give them some aeration. It's not really a decantation, but rather an aeration. We're just bringing oxygen into the wine so that it loses the reduced character that it may have developed during its long absence of oxygen. But once you've passed that moment, I don't think you need to add more aeration. And I don't think it's positive, and it could even be negative in the long run.
Okay, that's
So,
actually that's
so,
really interesting.
so yeah, decant recently disgorged wines. For instance, the LV, when it's first released, um, would be suitable to be decanted. That would be very welcome. Um, the young vintages of Clos des Goisses, the older vintages, for instance, if you take 2000 that we are now releasing, you should decant it. Now, if you do have bottles of the original disgorgement of 2000, uh, you shouldn't, because it's already started to oxidize a bit, which is natural. And by adding oxygen, you will only make this more pregnant. And I don't think it's desirable. Once again, with our style of wine, we like to preserve the freshness. So we should do that all the way into the way we serve it.
Okay, I'm going to slip in one little last question here for you. what kind of glass do you serving your champagne in? Are you using a wine glass, a flute? That's my question.
We're not using flutes. Flutes are too narrow, and they don't develop the bouquet. So I'd rather use either wine glasses, not too large. My ideal wine glass is Riedel Riesling. That works very, very well. It's almost a standard tasting glass, just a bit larger, and it's also prettier because it's lighter. And if you can have a mouth-blown one, it's even better. Or tulips. And we have plenty of offers of different tulips, different sizes of tulips. The series that Lehmann Glass has developed with Arnaud Lallemand at l'Assiette Champenoise is perfect. When we serve our champagnes with meals, we use several shapes of glasses so we know which is which and which wine is in which. But for a tasting or as an ideal glass, I use the same glass for all wines, and that's the Riedel Riesling.
Okay, terrific.
It's my
Thank
preferred
you.
glass. I like tasting with it, so I can relate to the shape of that glass.
Okay.
I know my feelings with that glass.
Well, listen, this has been wonderful having you join us on our podcast. It's really been a delight to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. We hope we get to talk to you again.
I hope so too. Thank you a lot.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for joining us for that fascinating podcast. If you want to find out more, we'll have the show notes on janeanson.com, and let us know what you thought. Look forward to seeing you next time.